The morning started like any other in their small one-bedroom apartment in Surulere, Lagos, but Ada felt something strange in her body. She had woken up earlier than usual, hoping to prepare Amika's breakfast before he rushed to work, yet her hands were trembling. When she tried to stand, a sharp pain shot through her legs and her vision blurred. She held the edge of the table to steady herself, but even the wooden surface felt slippery beneath her palms. "Amika," she called softly, her voice weak. Amika stepped out of the bathroom, adjusting his shirt collar. He paused when he saw her bent over the table. "Why are you standing like that?" he asked, frowning. "I don't feel well," Ada whispered. Before she could explain further, her knees buckled. Amika dropped the small bottle of perfume in his hand and rushed forward just in time to catch her before she hit the floor. "Ada! Ada, talk to me!" he shouted, his voice suddenly tight with panic. Ada tried to speak, but her lips felt heavy. Everything around her darkened for a moment, and the room spun in slow circles. Amika lifted her gently and placed her on the bed, tapping her cheeks lightly as if trying to wake her from sleep. "Stay awake," he said, his voice trembling now. "Just breathe." Her breathing became shallow and tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from fear. She had never seen her body fail her this way. Amika grabbed his car keys, wrapped her in a shawl, and carried her out of the apartment. He barely locked the door before hurrying to the car and placing her inside. The drive to the nearest hospital felt longer than usual. Ada rested her head against the seat, staring out the window with half-closed eyes. She saw blurred shapes, shops opening, children in school uniforms, an Okada rider arguing loudly with a driver. But they all felt distant. When Amika arrived at St. Andrew's Medical Center, he jumped out and called for help. 2 nurses rushed out with a stretcher, lifting Ada carefully onto it. Amika followed closely, one hand on her shoulder as they pushed her down the corridor. Inside the emergency room, Dr. Okafor walked in with quick, assured steps. He examined Ada, asked a few questions, then signaled to the nurses. "She needs to be admitted immediately," he said. "We need to run several tests. Her heart rate is unstable and she is severely dehydrated." Amika nodded quickly, though worry flashed across his face. He could handle emergencies, but he didn't like hospital environments. As they wheeled Ada to a ward, she forced a small smile at Amika. "I'll be fine," she whispered. "Don't talk," he said, brushing her hair gently from her face. "Just rest." But even as he said the words, a part of him felt unsettled. He could not explain the discomfort rising in his chest, discomfort not only for Ada, but for what the coming medical bills might look like. About an hour later, Ada began to feel slightly better. She lifted her hand weakly, trying to reach for Amika, who sat on a plastic chair beside her bed. His phone kept buzzing, but he ignored it. "Thank you for bringing me," she said. "You scared me." Before Ada could respond, her body stiffened. Her eyes fluttered, and she suddenly gasped for air. The heart monitor beside her bed began to beep rapidly. The nurse on duty ran into the room. "Doctor! Doctor!" Dr. Okafor rushed in again, his expression serious. "We need to stabilize her. Move her to the procedure room now." The nurses hurriedly unhooked some of the equipment, preparing to move Ada. Amika stood frozen, his heart pounding, watching as they pushed his wife through the hallway once again. The beeping grew louder, echoing through the corridor. "Please step aside, sir," the nurse said firmly. Amika pressed his back against the wall, watching helplessly as the doors swung shut behind Ada. He stood there, breathing heavily, guilt creeping into his chest. For the first time, the fear of losing her hit him with alarming force. Inside the room, he heard Dr. Okafor shout, "Pass me the saline, we're losing time." Hours passed in a blur for Amaka. He sat in the small waiting area of St. Andrew's Medical Center, running his hands through his hair and muttering curses under his breath. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, each buzz echoing the tension in his chest. Nurses and patients moved past him, but he felt as though he were trapped in a world where time had slowed down. Finally, Dr. Okofer emerged from the procedure room, his white coat stained faintly from the emergency. His face was composed but serious, and Amaka leapt to his feet. "Doctor, how is she?" Ameka's voice was tight, almost breaking. Dr. Okofer sighed, removing his stethoscope from his neck. "She's stable now. We managed to stabilize her heart rate and her dehydration. But she is still very weak. She will need to remain under observation for at least a week." Amaka nodded quickly, relief washing over him in waves. "Thank God. Thank you, doctor. Please, can I see her now?" The doctor hesitated for a moment. "Yes, but be careful. She cannot exert herself. Talk to her softly. No sudden movements." Amaka followed the nurse back into the ward, where Ada lay on the bed, pale and fragile. Her eyes flickered open as he approached, a weak smile forming despite her exhaustion. "Emeka," she whispered. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand gently. "You're going to be okay, I promise." Ada closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to be," Amaka said, squeezing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept into his mind. He had never imagined that a sickness could feel so consuming, so absolute. The bills, the appointments, the constant worry, they weighed on him already, and the thought of more drained his heart. Yet he refused to let Ada see that he was afraid. She had to believe he was strong. Over the next few days, Amaka stayed at her side almost constantly. He brought her meals, helped her sit upright, and spoke in soft tones to keep her calm. Dr. Okofer checked in regularly, explaining her recovery in careful detail. Ada's condition slowly improved, but she remained fragile, her body shaking with each small movement. During one quiet evening, Amaka sat on the plastic chair beside her bed, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. He watched the steady rise and fall of her chest, feeling a deep mix of love, fear, and helplessness. "Why did this happen to me?" Ada whispered, her voice shaky. "You're strong," Amaka said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You'll get through this. I'm not leaving you, no matter what." But yet, that night, as he left the ward briefly to make a phone call, he felt the first stirring of a dark thought, one he immediately tried to push aside. What if this went on for months? What if Ada's sickness drained him everything, his energy, his money, his future? He shook his head violently, ashamed of even thinking it. Ada did not deserve such thoughts. The next morning, Amaka returned to the hospital with breakfast and fresh flowers. Ada's eyes lit up at the sight, and for a moment the fear seemed to lift from both of them. But the relief was temporary. Even as she smiled, her body remained frail, and Dr. Okofer reminded Amaka that she could collapse at any time. Amaka felt a deep, unspoken pressure mounting on him, responsibility, love, fear, and a creeping sense of helplessness. He realized that nothing in his life had prepared him for this, and while he cared for Ada with all his heart, part of him wondered how long he could sustain this reality without breaking. That night, as Lagos glittered outside the hospital window and the hum of traffic filled the quiet air, Amaka sat alone in the waiting area. He thought about Ada's trembling body, her whispered words, and the fragility of life itself. A storm of emotions rose in him: fear, guilt, devotion, and exhaustion. He did not know that this night, this moment,
would be a turning point in the choices he would soon face. And so, as the city continued its endless rhythm outside, Amaka realized that the days ahead would test not just his patience, but the very essence of who he was. His love for Ada was real, but reality was demanding far more than he ever anticipated. The chapter closed with Amaka staring at the empty chair across from him, haunted by the question of how far he would go for the woman he loved. The following morning, Amaka returned to the hospital with a restless mind and a bag filled with fruits, freshly squeezed juice, and herbal teas he had read about online. The ward was quiet, the soft hum of ventilators and the occasional cough creating a strangely comforting rhythm. Ada lay in bed, her eyes half closed, a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by illness, yet her presence still pulled at his heart with a force he could not ignore. "Good morning," Amaka said, softly, placing the items on the small table beside her bed. Ada tried to smile, her lips trembling. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with a fragile warmth. He took her hand in his, feeling the thin, almost brittle fingers against his palm. "How did you sleep?" "Restless," she admitted, "but I had dreams, strange ones." Amaka nodded, immediately understanding that sickness brought not just weakness, but fear and confusion. "Do you want to tell me about them?" Ada's eyes searched his, and for a moment Amaka thought she might collapse from the effort. "I dreamed that I was alone, that you left me." Her words pierced him. Amaka's chest tightened, a cold sweat breaking across his back. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "I could never leave you. Never. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Ada's eyes softened, and she let out a sigh, leaning slightly against the pillows. "I know, I fear so much. I fear that my illness will take everything from us." Amaka swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that they would get through this together, but the truth gnawed at him. Her sickness was consuming our lives, the money, the time, the constant worry, and though he loved her deeply, part of him wondered how much he could bear before breaking. He pushed the thought aside quickly, ashamed of it. Ada did not deserve such thoughts. Dr. Okofor entered the room quietly, carrying a clipboard. "Good morning, Ada. How are we feeling today?" Ada smiled faintly. "Better, doctor, I think." Dr. Okofor nodded, scanning the notes on his clipboard. "You've made some progress, but you must remain cautious. No sudden movements and no stress." Ameka's jaw tightened. "I understand, doctor. I'll make sure she rests." The doctor gave him a measured look. "You're doing a good job being here, Mr. Amaka. But remember, recovery is slow. There will be difficult days ahead." As the doctor left, Amaka sat back, his mind racing. Difficult days ahead. Those words felt heavier than any he had ever heard. He realized that the path of caring for Ada was not a simple one. It was a journey that demanded every ounce of patience, strength, and sacrifice he possessed. Later that afternoon, while Ada rested, Amaka walked along the narrow corridor outside her room. The hospital smelled faintly of disinfectant and antiseptic, and the faint echo of nurses' footsteps followed him. He stopped by the window overlooking Lagos, watching the city pulse with life, cars honking, street vendors calling out, and people moving quickly towards destinations he no longer felt part of. He thought about the life they had dreamed of together, marriage, children, security, happiness, and how it now seemed fragile, threatened by the sheer unpredictability of illness. A lump formed in his throat, but he forced himself to stand tall. He could not let fear dictate his actions. Ada needed him, and he would not fail her. By evening, Amaka returned to her bedside, bringing a small radio to play soft music and reading aloud from a book they both loved. Ada's breathing slowed, her body relaxing slightly, and Amaka felt a fleeting sense of accomplishment. Yet beneath the calm, the storm of worry and doubt lingered. He knew that the next week, the next month, could test his resolve in ways he had never imagined. As the night fell over Lagos and the lights
As the night fell over Lagos and the lights of the city glimmered in the distance, Emeka held Ada's hand tightly, silently promising himself that no matter how difficult the days ahead, he would remain. But deep inside, a shadow of unease stirred, one that would soon grow into a question he could no longer ignore. The next morning, the hospital felt colder than usual. The walls, pale and sterile, reflected Emeka's growing anxiety. He arrived early, carrying a bag of fresh fruits and herbal drinks, his mind restless. Ada lay in bed, her eyes barely open, her skin pale against the crisp white sheets. She had barely eaten breakfast, and the nurse mentioned that she had refused most of her medications. Emeka pulled a chair close to her bed and sat, his hands folded tightly together. "Ada, please, try to eat something. You need your strength." Ada tried to smile, but it was weak and fleeting. I can't," she whispered. "Everything tastes bitter. Everything feels heavy." Emeka's chest tightened. He hated seeing her like this, hated the fragility that sickness had imposed on someone he loved so fiercely. He wanted to shake her awake, to tell her that things would be fine, that the world outside those walls could wait, but he knew words alone would not heal her. He reached for her hand, clasping it firmly. "Ada, I promise you we will get through this. Whatever it takes, I'll be here." Ada's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I know you're here, but sometimes I feel so alone, even when you're near." Emeka's heart throbbed painfully. Her honesty pierced him deeper than he had expected. He leaned closer, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "You are never alone," he murmured. "Not while I breathe, not while I exist. I will not let you face this by yourself." At that moment, Dr. Okafor entered the room. "Good morning, Ada. Mr. Emeka," he said politely, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "I have some updates on her condition." Emeka straightened in his seat, bracing himself. "Your wife's illness," Dr. Okafor continued carefully, "is progressing more slowly than we feared. That is a positive sign. However, the latest tests show that she is extremely vulnerable to infections, and any delay in medication or nutrition could complicate recovery." Emeka swallowed hard. "I understand, doctor. I'll make sure she eats and takes everything on time." The doctor nodded. "Good. But remember, Mr. Emeka, recovery is as much emotional as it is physical. Ada needs constant reassurance and care. The smallest signs of distress can affect her body. You must remain patient, vigilant, and steadfast." After Dr. Okafor left, Emeka turned to Ada, whose fragile form seemed even smaller against the hospital bed. "You hear that?" he said gently. "You are strong. We are strong. Together we can face anything." Ada let out a soft laugh, but it was tinged with sadness. "Strong. Yes, but I feel like I am fading. I fear leaving you alone someday." Emeka's throat tightened, and for the first time since her illness began, he felt a shadow of doubt creeping into his mind. Could he really handle this? Could he endure the endless hospital nights, the uncertainty, the emotional weight of watching someone he loved suffer?
That evening, as Lagos's skyline glimmered with neon lights and the city buzzed with life below, Emeka sat beside Ada, reading aloud from a book of old African folk tales. Her eyes, though heavy with fatigue, followed his every word. The story was meant to comfort, but Emeka could not shake the unease gnawing at him. As the night deepened, Emeka held her hand close, whispering promises he hoped he could keep. Deep in his heart, a question lingered, a shadow he could not yet face. How long could love and duty withstand the relentless pressure of sickness? And somewhere, in the quiet of the hospital, that question began to grow into something heavier, something that would soon demand an answer he was not yet ready to give.
The sun rose over Lagos, spilling light through the hospital windows and illuminating the pale walls of Ada's room. Emeka had been awake for hours, sitting in the chair beside her bed, staring at her chest rising and falling with each fragile breath. The quiet rhythm of her heartbeat had become the only sound anchoring him to reality. And yet, even in that steady pulse, he felt unease creeping in. Ada stirred, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Emeka reached over, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Ada, it's morning. The nurses will be here soon. How are you feeling?" Ada's eyes opened slowly, filled with both love and sorrow. I am tired," she whispered. "Tired of this struggle. Tired of being so weak." Emeka's heart ached. He had always thought love could carry them through anything. But now, sitting in the sterile hospital room, he realized that love alone could not heal sickness. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be fine, but the truth weighed heavily on his chest. "I know, Ada," he said softly, "but you are not alone. I am here. We will get through this together, one day at a time." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but the effort seemed to drain her further. Emeka's hands trembled slightly as he held hers. In the quiet of the room, the bustling city of Lagos seemed far away, replaced by the relentless pressure of responsibility and fear. As the nurses arrived to check her vitals and administer medication, Emeka observed every movement carefully. He was meticulous in following every instruction, ensuring that Ada received exactly what she needed. But inside, doubt began to creep into his mind. How long could he sustain this constant vigilance? How long before exhaustion and frustration would overpower his resolve? Throughout the day, Emeka alternated between reading to her, feeding her carefully prepared meals, and speaking to doctors about her progress. The hospital staff treated him with respect, noting his devotion. But even their admiration could not ease the tension building inside him. Each smile from Ada was a fragile thread, each sigh a reminder of the relentless fight ahead. By evening, the strain began to show. Emeka's shoulders slumped as he leaned back in his chair. The weight of the city outside, the noise, the demands, the relentless pace of Lagos life pressed on him, making the hospital walls feel smaller, almost suffocating. Ada, sensing his fatigue, reached out weakly. "Emeka, are you tired?" "I am," he admitted, his voice quiet, almost too honest. "But I will not leave you. Not now. Not ever." She nodded, eyes closing briefly. "I believe you. I just wish I could be stronger for you." Emeka shook his head, brushing a tear from his own cheek. "Ada, you are strong, stronger than anyone I know.
But it is okay to rest. It is okay to lean on me." As the night deepened, Amaka sat in silence, listening to Ada's soft breathing, contemplating the future. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with sleepless nights, endless hospital visits, and constant worry. And somewhere, deep within him, a shadow of doubt had taken root, a question he was not ready to confront. Could he endure the relentless weight of duty and love without faltering? The city of Lagos hummed beyond the hospital walls, alive and indifferent, while inside the room, a man and a woman clung to each other in fragile hope. Emeka held her hand tightly, whispering promises he feared he might one day struggle to keep. And in that quiet room, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, the first seeds of regret, fear, and human vulnerability began to take root, waiting for the day they would confront him fully.
The following morning, Emeka arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, his briefcase in hand and his face drawn with fatigue. The city of Lagos was already alive with traffic horns, street vendors calling out their wares, and the endless hum of activity. But for Emeka, the world outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the constant presence of Ada's fragile body lying in the hospital bed. Ada stirred as he entered, her eyes lighting up faintly at the sight of him. "Good morning, Emeka," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Good morning, Ada," he replied, forcing a smile. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little," she admitted. "The nurses were kind, but I keep waking." Emeka nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He wanted to tell her that she looked better, that her pallor was slightly less severe, but the truth was undeniable. Her illness was relentless, and he felt himself being worn down by the daily grind of care. The hospital routine was unforgiving. Medication schedules, doctor consultations, physiotherapy exercises. It was a constant cycle that left little room for rest. Emeka followed it all meticulously, yet he could feel the toll it was taking on his body and mind. His meetings at work were suffering, his sleep was fractured, and his finances were being drained faster than he had anticipated. By midday, Emeka found himself in the small hospital cafeteria, clutching a cup of bitter coffee. His mind wandered to bills piling up at home, the debts he had promised himself he would clear, and the mounting stress of responsibilities he could not ignore. A part of him resented the situation, though he hated admitting it even to himself. Returning to Ada's room, he found her eyes following him. "Emeka, are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with concern despite her weakness. "I am," he said quickly, not wanting her to sense his inner turmoil. She reached out to hold his hand, her grip weak but affectionate. "You do so much for me. I worry about you." Emeka looked at her, torn between love and exhaustion. "Ada, I will always do everything I can for you, but some days it feels like the world is heavier than I can carry." She did not respond immediately, but the sadness in her eyes said more than words ever could. Emeka sat beside her, their hands entwined, and for a moment the weight of responsibility seemed to merge with the love they shared. He wanted to believe he could endure anything for her sake, but the reality of his human limits pressed on him relentlessly. Hours passed slowly. Emeka administered medication, monitored her vitals, and spoke gently to her. But a subtle change was happening inside him. The constant pressure, the sleepless nights, and the financial strain were creating cracks in his resolve.
He found himself questioning not Ada's courage, which was unwavering, but his own ability to remain steadfast in the face of endless hardship. As the sun set over Lagos, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, Emeka sank into the chair beside her. Ada rested her head on his shoulder, murmuring words of comfort that she barely had the strength to speak. And in that quiet, intimate moment, Emeka felt the first stirrings of something dangerous. Frustration wrapped in guilt, exhaustion tangled with love, and a creeping fear that he might one day fail the woman who had trusted him completely. The city outside moved on, oblivious to the struggle unfolding inside the small hospital room. Emeka held her hand tighter, whispering promises he feared he might not be able to keep, and wondered for the first time in his life how long a man could shoulder a burden like this before it broke him.
The sun had barely risen over the Lagos skyline when Emeka received the call that would make his stomach sink. His bank account, already thin from weeks of hospital bills and missed work, had been overdrawn. Unexpected expenses, an urgent repair for the apartment, a demand from a debt collector, had wiped out the last of his savings. Emeka sank into the worn hospital chair, holding the phone loosely at his side. He could hear Ada's shallow breathing, each inhalation a delicate reminder of her fragility. Panic tightened its grip on him. How would he pay for her next round of tests, the medications, the care that could no longer be postponed? He glanced around the hospital room, taking in the small details that had once seemed insignificant. The peeling paint on the walls, the slightly cracked linoleum floor, the hum of the machines, all of it now felt oppressive. Every corner seemed to whisper one word: impossible. "I can't do this alone," he muttered under his breath, his hands trembling. He had imagined supporting Ada through sickness and health, but the reality was far harsher than he had ever expected. The bills kept piling up. The hospital demanded more money for tests and consultations, and his job offered little flexibility. Every choice seemed like a gamble. Ada stirred, opening her eyes slowly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice weak but gentle. I don't know how we'll manage," I admitted, swallowing hard. "The hospital, the medicines, it's all becoming too much." She reached for his hand, her touch warm against his clammy skin. "Emeka, we will find a way. We always do." Her words should have brought comfort, but they only reminded him of the harsh reality. He had never felt more powerless. The responsibility to save her, to ensure she survived, weighed heavily on him. The fear of losing her and of failing as a husband gnawed at his mind relentlessly. Emeka spent the rest of the day scrambling. He called friends, explained his situation to the hospital staff, and even considered borrowing from a local moneylender at steep interest rates. Each solution seemed temporary. Each option felt like a dangerous compromise. He could see the strain in Ada's eyes, the quiet worry she tried to hide behind forced smiles. As night fell, Emeka sat beside her bed, staring at her pale, peaceful face. He felt a mixture of love, fear, and guilt. Every beat of her heart was a reminder of what was at stake, and every minute he couldn't provide for her care felt like a moral failing. He realized then that this crisis was more than financial. It was a test of endurance, of loyalty, of the very limits of his devotion. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the storm inside the hospital room. And Emeka understood something painful. The coming days would demand sacrifices he wasn't sure he could make. But he also knew one truth he could not ignore. He could not, would not, abandon Ada. Not now, not ever. Yet the weight of his obligations,
The shadow of his own doubts and the mounting financial strain would push him to choices that could either save them both or destroy everything they had left.
The following morning, Amaka barely slept. Anxiety had clung to him like a second skin, and the hospital room felt colder, harsher, somehow heavier than before. The weight of responsibility pressed down, reminding him with every breath that Ada's life was in his hands. Just as he was about to step out for a brief walk to clear his mind, the hospital door creaked open. It was his cousin, Michael, a man known for his smooth words and questionable schemes. Michael carried an air of confidence, a stark contrast to Ameka's anxious demeanor. "Amaka," Michael greeted warmly, though there was a glint of calculation in his eyes. "I heard about Ada, about what's happening." Amaka managed a weak smile. "Yes, it's been difficult." Michael stepped inside, scanning the room, then leaned casually against the edge of the bed. "I think I can help," he said, his tone almost casual. "But it's not the usual route." Amaka frowned. He had always known Michael to offer assistance that came with strings attached. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Michael lowered his voice. "I know someone who can cover all the bills, every test, every medicine, even private care. No questions asked. You won't have to worry about a thing." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Of course, there's a catch. It's a business deal, nothing illegal exactly, but it's not exactly straightforward either." Ameka's heart raced. Relief flickered, mingled with suspicion. I can't take help that comes with conditions I don't understand," he said carefully. "Ada's life isn't a bargaining chip." Michael waved a hand dismissively. "I understand your concern, cousin, but think about it. Your wife's life is at stake. Sometimes we have to bend the rules to survive. And besides, it's a short-term arrangement. Once Ada is better, you can handle the rest yourself." Ameka sank onto the chair, rubbing his face. He wanted to trust Michael, but something deep inside him warned him against it. The city outside roared with life, and yet he felt trapped, cornered by circumstances that left no easy answers. He looked at Ada, who had woken slightly, and smiled weakly at him. "You're thinking too hard," she whispered, though her voice carried the frailty of her illness. "We'll manage. Somehow." Her faith in him should have been comforting, but it also heightened the pressure. Could he take a morally gray path to ensure her survival? Or would that path lead to consequences far worse than failure? Michael's eyes never left him. "Time is of the essence, Ameka. Every day you wait, the bills grow, the hospital grows impatient. You don't have the luxury of hesitation." The offer dangled in front of him like a shimmering, dangerous temptation. Ameka's mind raced, weighing the cost of pride against the value of Ada's life. Could he justify risking integrity to save her? Or would that compromise destroy the very foundation of the life he hoped to rebuild with her? For hours, he sat in silent torment, listening to the beeping monitors, feeling the rhythm of Ada's fragile heart, knowing that his next decision could change everything. And deep down, he feared that whatever choice he made, it might not just save her, it could mark the beginning of a path he could never turn back from.
Amaka spent the night staring at the ceiling, haunted by the echo of Michael's words. The city outside Lagos hummed with life, but for him, time had slowed. Every thought twisted into 1,000 what-ifs, each scenario more unbearable than the last. Ada's soft breaths, her fragile fingers curling slightly around the bedsheet, reminded him why he could not walk away. By morning, he had made his decision. With a deep breath, he called Michael. I will do it," he said cautiously when Michael answered. "I'll accept your help." There was a pause on the line, and then Michael's voice broke into a sly grin. "Smart choice, Amaka. You won't regret this. I'll make the arrangements today. Ada will get the best care possible, and you can focus on being with her." Relief and guilt collided inside Amaka. He knew he had crossed a line he had always promised himself he would never cross. Yet, when he looked at Ada, frail but still clinging to life, he couldn't regret the choice. Survival had a price. Within hours, Michael returned with a team of professionals, accountants, private nurses, and medical coordinators. They moved quickly, arranging tests, paying off lingering hospital debts, and ensuring Ada had access to the rare medications she needed. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing a side of the city that few ever saw. The network of quiet, sometimes shady power that made the impossible possible. Emeka watched everything with mixed emotions: gratitude for the help, fear for the strings attached, and worry that one day he would understand the full cost of this choice. Ada noticed the change too. Though still weak, she smiled, and her eyes sparkled with hope. "You did this for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even if it feels complicated." "Yes," Emeka replied softly. "I did. I promise I will always try to protect you." But beneath that promise, a shadow lingered. He could feel that Michael's help was not just charity. There was an expectation, a subtle pressure, an invisible leash that tied their fates together in ways Emeka did not yet understand. As the days passed, Ada's condition slowly improved. Each small victory felt monumental. A stable temperature, a clearer mind, a stronger pulse. Emeka tried to focus on these wins, telling himself that the ends justified the means. Yet, outside the hospital, Michael's influence began to creep into their lives. Emeka noticed subtle changes, unusual requests, financial advice that seemed more self-serving than helpful, and whispered reminders that Ada's care depended on his compliance. One evening, as he sat beside Ada's bed, holding her hand, he realized that saving her life had also begun to change his own. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine a future, a life rebuilt, love restored, and debts, both moral and financial, repaid. But deep in the back of his mind, he knew that this was only the beginning. The choice he had made had opened a door to a path filled with uncertainty, temptations, and tests of character he could not yet see. And somewhere in the bustling streets of Lagos, Michael smiled quietly, knowing that he had subtly shifted the balance of power. Emeka had won Ada's survival, but at a cost that had yet to reveal itself fully. The coming days would challenge Emeka in ways he had never imagined. Every decision, every interaction would ripple outward, shaping a future that might bring salvation or destruction.
Emeka awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the bedside table. He rubbed his eyes, still tired from another sleepless night spent watching over Ada. The light of dawn barely illuminated the small hospital room, and the hum of Lagos outside felt unusually loud, almost urgent. It was Michael. "Emeka, we need to talk." The voice on the phone was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge. "There's a situation that requires your attention. I expect you in my office before noon." Emeka's stomach twisted. Michael's meetings were never casual, and he had learned early on that they often carried heavy, invisible weights. He looked at Ada, sleeping peacefully, her face pale but serene. "I can't leave her," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But Michael's tone allowed no argument. "This is urgent. Ada's care depends on it. You must come." With a heavy heart, Emeka agreed.
He arranged for a nurse to stay with Ada and hurried out, his mind racing. The ride through Lagos was tense. The streets were crowded, vendors calling out their wares, and the ever-present honking of cars created a chaotic soundtrack. Emeka felt every horn, every shout, as if the city itself were warning him of the day ahead. Michael's office was in a high-rise near Victoria Island. From the windows, Lagos sprawled below like a living organism, the sun glinting off the glass towers. Michael was waiting, impeccably dressed, with a folder in hand. "Sit," he said, motioning to a leather chair. "I have something important to show you." Emeka seated himself cautiously, his palms sweating. Michael opened the folder, revealing documents filled with numbers, contracts, and signatures. "These are investments," Michael explained, "opportunities, but they require quick decisions and absolute trust." Emeka frowned. "I don't understand. How does this relate to Ada?" Michael's gaze was steady, almost piercing. "Every decision you make now has consequences. If you want Ada to continue receiving care at this level, you must follow certain directives. Some are financial, some strategic. I am helping you, but there is a price." Emeka felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had agreed to accept help, but the reality of the strings attached was more intense than he had imagined. Each choice now seemed like a test, and failing could endanger Ada's fragile recovery. "You're asking me to compromise myself?" Emeka said slowly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Not compromise," Michael corrected smoothly, "just participate. Life in this city has rules, Emeka. You wanted to save Ada, and now I'm giving you the tools to do it. But nothing comes without effort or vigilance." For the first time, Emeka realized that his moral compass would be tested. He had stepped into a world where survival, love, and ethics collided violently. One wrong move, and all he had fought for could vanish. He left Michael's office feeling a mixture of determination and fear. Ada's life depended on his ability to navigate this complex, shadowy world, and every decision carried weight he had never imagined. He had saved her, yes, but the price of that salvation was only beginning to show itself. Back at the hospital, Emeka watched Ada sleeping, fragile, yet alive. He silently vowed that he would protect her at all costs. But deep down, he knew that the coming days would push him to the edge, morally, emotionally, and spiritually. The first real test of Emeka's resolve had begun.
The next few days were a blur for Emeka. Michael's instructions weighed on him like a storm cloud. Each task he was asked to perform tested his patience, his judgment, and sometimes his conscience. He found himself working late into the night, reviewing contracts, making calls, and attending meetings that seemed to be designed to stretch him thin. But no matter how busy he became, Emeka's mind always returned to Ada. Every evening he would sit by her bedside, holding her hand, feeling the faint warmth of her skin and listening to her shallow breathing. She looked weaker than ever, yet she smiled at him whenever she stirred, her eyes filled with trust and love. It was that smile that anchored him. It was the only thing keeping him sane in a world that felt increasingly ruthless. Michael, however, was relentless. One morning, he summoned Emeka to a private meeting at his penthouse in Ikoyi. The view of Lagos from that height was breathtaking, but Emeka barely noticed it. He could only think of Ada and the consequences of failure. "You have done well," Michael began, his tone deceptively kind. "But you must understand that goodwill alone does not sustain survival in Lagos. You're in a delicate position, Emeka. Every choice you make now has ripples far beyond your imagination."
Amaka swallowed hard, trying to remain composed. "I am doing everything I can. My focus is on Ada. I won't let anything happen to her." Michael studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I am aware, and that is why you must be ready to make difficult decisions, decisions that may challenge your values." The words struck Emeka like a blow. He had never imagined that helping Ada would demand such sacrifices. He thought of the nights he had spent praying, pleading with God to keep her alive, and now he was being asked to navigate moral gray areas he had never faced before. Returning to the hospital, Emeka's mind was restless. Ada stirred slightly as he approached, her eyes fluttering open. "Amaka?" she whispered, weakly. "I'm here, Ada," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He tried to smile, but it felt forced, a mask to hide the turmoil brewing inside. I feel so tired," she said, her voice fragile. "I don't want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Amaka said firmly. "I will never see you that way. You are my life now, Ada. Nothing else matters." That night, as he sat beside her bed, Amaka realized the truth he had been avoiding. Protecting Ada would require him to change in ways he had never anticipated. Michael's world was not forgiving, and if Amaka wanted to safeguard her, he would have to navigate treacherous waters, sometimes bending, sometimes breaking, always vigilant. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a spark of resolve in Amaka. He had abandoned no one in his life before, and he would not fail now. Ada's life was intertwined with his, and he would endure every trial, face every moral dilemma, and confront every shadow if it meant keeping her alive. But as he gazed at her peaceful face, he could not shake the haunting question: how far would he go before he lost himself entirely?
The following morning, Emeka received a call from Michael, summoning him urgently to his office in Victoria Island. Emeka's heart sank. He knew from experience that an urgent call from Michael usually meant something that could not be ignored, and often it involved crossing lines he had never imagined crossing. By the time Emeka arrived at the sleek glass-paneled office, Michael was already waiting, a folder in his hand and a piercing look in his eyes. "Sit down, Emeka," he commanded. "What is it, sir?" Emeka asked cautiously, sensing the gravity in Michael's tone. Michael handed him the folder. Inside were financial statements, contracts, and a detailed list of accounts. "We have a situation," Michael said. "There is a client threatening to pull out of a deal that is critical to our operations. If we lose this client, Ada's care and your continued stability could be in jeopardy." Emeka's stomach tightened. He knew from experience that an urgent call from Michael usually meant something that could not be ignored, and often it involved crossing lines he had never imagined crossing. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, already fearing the answer. Michael's eyes narrowed. "I want you to influence the client, persuade them to stay, use whatever means necessary. Remember, Emeka, in our world, a moral choice is a luxury, not a requirement. Ada's safety depends on your effectiveness here." Emeka's mind raced. "Whatever means necessary? Sir, I don't know if I can compromise my integrity." Michael's expression was cold, almost surgical. "Integrity is a luxury for those who can afford it. Right now, you can't. Do this right, and Ada remains safe. Fail, and well, you know the stakes." Emeka left the office feeling hollow. He walked the busy streets of Lagos, the sun glaring down on the bustling crowds, and wondered how he had ended up here. He had never imagined that protecting Ada would require him to manipulate, to deceive, even to betray his own principles. And yet, he could not allow her to suffer because of his hesitation. Later that day, Emeka met with the client, a high-profile businessman in Lekki. He sat across from him, forcing a calm exterior while his mind screamed with doubt. He employed every tact, every carefully crafted argument Michael had drilled into him, walking the fine line between persuasion and manipulation. By the end of the meeting, the client agreed to remain with Michael's firm. Emeka felt a wave of relief, but it was bitter. The victory was tainted. He had crossed a line he could never uncross, and it left a residue of guilt that clung to him like a second skin.
Returning to Ada's side that evening, he found her awake, her weak smile greeting him. "You're back," she whispered. "How did it go?" "It's done," Emeka replied, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "Everything is stable now. You're safe." Ada reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "I don't care about any deals or business. Just stay with me." Emeka nodded, swallowing hard. The moral compromise he had made weighed heavily on him, yet he knew this was only the beginning. Michael's world was ruthless, and protecting Ada would demand more sacrifices. Some he could anticipate, others that would blindside him completely. As he watched her drift to sleep, Emeka realized a painful truth. To keep Ada alive, he would have to navigate a world of shadows, a place where right and wrong were blurred, and where every choice came at a cost. And deep in his heart, he wondered whether he could survive this world without losing himself entirely.
The days that followed were a whirlwind for Emeka. Each morning brought new instructions from Michael, each more complicated and morally challenging than the last. The financial deals, the client negotiations, the subtle manipulations. Emeka felt himself slipping into a world he had never imagined existing outside of stories and warnings. Yet every decision, every compromise, was justified in his mind because it meant keeping Ada alive. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Lagos skyline, Emeka sat in his small office, reviewing documents Michael had left him. A particular file caught his attention. It detailed plans to acquire a struggling company in Enugu. The acquisition was legal, but the methods suggested to secure it bordered on unethical. He stared at the papers, his hands trembling. He had never thought he would be the type of person to follow such instructions. But then he remembered Ada lying in her hospital bed, frail and fighting for every breath. The thought of losing her made his moral hesitations seem like a luxury he could not afford. Michael's voice interrupted his thoughts, coming from a phone call that seemed to pierce the silence of the office. "Emeka, have you started the Enugu acquisition yet?" Michael asked, his tone sharp and impatient. "Yes, sir," Emeka replied, forcing calm into his voice. "I've scheduled meetings with the key stakeholders and am reviewing the contracts carefully." "Good," Michael said. "Remember, Emeka, efficiency matters more than sentiment. Do whatever it takes to finalize the deal." After the call, Emeka leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Doing whatever it takes was easy to say, but far more difficult to enact when it involved bending people's trust, exploiting weaknesses, and walking the fine line between legality and deceit. The next morning, Emeka traveled to Enugu. He met with the company's executives, carefully presenting offers and suggestions that would sway them toward Michael's interests. He smiled politely, praised their work, but subtly introduced doubts about their current management, creating the exact scenario Michael had instructed. By the end of the day, the executives seemed convinced, nodding along and asking Emeka to draft the necessary agreements. He left the office with a hollow satisfaction. The deal was progressing, but with every step, he felt a part of himself eroding. Returning to Lagos that evening, Emeka visited Ada in the hospital. Her weak eyes lit up when she saw him. "You've been busy again," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with affection. "Yes," he replied, sitting beside her bed. "But I'm making sure everything is secure. You're safe, Ada. That's all that matters." Ada reached for his hand. "I don't need you to be a hero, Emeka. Just stay with me. That's enough." He smiled faintly, the guilt gnawing at him. Protecting her meant doing things he had never imagined. Manipulations, half-truths, subtle lies. But every act was justified by her survival. As he sat by her side, Emeka realized that Michael's influence over him was growing stronger. The line between right and wrong had become dangerously thinned, and he feared that one misstep could destroy not only his own conscience, but also the fragile world he had built around Ada. And yet, despite the darkness closing in, he clung to hope.
Every day Ada lived was a day he could still make things right. Every breath she took was a reminder that the sacrifices, however morally ambiguous, were worth enduring. But Amaka also knew that Michael's demands were far from over, and the next choice he would have to make might be the most difficult yet.
The next morning, Amaka's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent, and laced with menace. "Amaka Obi," the caller said, "we know who you are, and we know about the woman you're protecting." Amaka froze, heart pounding. The voice continued, "You've been careful, but if you don't cooperate, she suffers. One wrong move and she won't see another sunrise." The line went dead before Amaka could respond. His palms were sweaty, and he felt a chill run down his spine. The threat was real. Someone knew about Ada. Someone wanted to use her as leverage. He hurried to the hospital, anxiety gnawing at him with every step. When he reached Ada's room, he found her sitting up, looking weaker than usual, her cheeks pale. "Amaka," she whispered, "you look worried. What happened?" "I'll explain later," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "You just rest." As he sat beside her bed, Amaka's mind raced. The call had come at the worst possible time. Michael's plans were already morally complex, but now a direct threat to Ada's life had escalated the stakes. He had to make a choice, one that could compromise everything he had tried to protect, or worse, put Ada in danger. He considered calling the police, but he knew Michael would never forgive him. He also feared that involving the authorities might make the threat worse. Every possible solution seemed entangled in moral uncertainty. Amaka thought of the files from the Enugu acquisition. If he redirected Michael's plans temporarily, he might be able to buy some time. But defying Michael, even slightly, was dangerous. The man was ruthless, and Amaka had already seen glimpses of the lengths he would go to achieve his goals. By late afternoon, Amaka made his decision. He contacted Michael, framing it as a strategic delay. "Sir, I believe we need to pause the Enugu deal for a week. Some unforeseen complications require our attention locally." The silence over the line felt like a hammer striking Amaka's chest. Then he spoke, cold and calculating. "Do what you must, Amaka. But remember, the woman's life is in your hands. One wrong move, and everything falls apart." Amaka hung up, heart racing. The words echoed in his mind. Every action from this point forward would determine Ada's safety and his own moral compass. That evening, as he sat with Ada in the dimly lit hospital room, Amaka felt the weight of responsibility like never before. He looked at her fragile frame, the soft rise and fall of her chest, and he knew there was no turning back. He had to navigate Michael's demands, the shadowy threats lurking in the background, and the ever-present fear of losing Ada. Each choice he made was a step along a dangerous tightrope, and one misstep could unravel everything. Yet despite the fear, Amaka remained resolute. He would protect Ada, even if it meant surrendering parts of himself along the way. Every decision, every morally gray act was a sacrifice for her life. And deep down, he knew that when the storm finally passed, he would either emerge as her savior or someone forever haunted by the choices he had been forced to make. Outside, the city lights of Lagos flickered against the dark night sky, indifferent to the private battles waging within its streets. Amaka stared at them, feeling small, yet determined, knowing that the days ahead would demand more courage, more cunning, and more resilience than he had ever imagined. The following morning, Amaka sat in the small living room of his Lagos apartment, reviewing every detail of the threat. The anonymous caller's words replayed endlessly in his mind, their menace gnawing at his nerves. He knew the first step was gathering information. He needed to know exactly who was behind the threat and what they wanted. He pulled out his laptop and began cross-referencing the latest movements in the Enugu business acquisition. looking for irregular patterns, unregistered contacts, and potential leaks. Hours passed, the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. Finally, a pattern emerged. A few suspicious transfers, anonymous emails, and a trail that led directly to a small, abandoned warehouse near the outskirts of Lagos. "This is where it begins," Amaka muttered under his breath. He realized that confronting the threat directly would be dangerous, but it was the only way to protect Ada. Hesitation could cost her life. Later that evening, Amaka returned to Ada's hospital room. She had been sleeping when he arrived, her breathing shallow but steady. He gently shook her shoulder. "Ada, we might need to move soon. There's a place you can hide safely, but it won't be easy." Ada's eyes fluttered open, filled with trust and fear. "Amaka, you're not leaving me alone, are you?" He shook his head firmly. "Never. I promise you no one will harm you while I'm here." Over the next few hours, Amaka carefully planned the confrontation. He coordinated with a small circle of trusted friends, people who could assist without drawing attention. Each detail was scrutinized: routes, timing, possible obstacles and contingencies. Amaka knew one mistake could result in disaster. At dusk, he made his move. Clad in dark clothing, he approached the warehouse identified from the digital trail. The air was heavy, the streets unusually quiet, as if Lagos itself held its breath. Every step he took seemed to echo ominously against the surrounding buildings. Inside the warehouse, shadows twisted around crates and discarded machinery. Amaka moved cautiously, senses sharpened to every sound. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, tall, with cold eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. "You shouldn't have come here alone," the man said, voice calm but threatening. "Do you know what you risk?" Amaka squared his shoulders. "I'm not leaving Ada to your hands. If you want her safe, you'll deal with me first." The tension in the room was suffocating. The man stepped closer, and Amaka realized this confrontation would not be about negotiations. It would be about survival, about asserting control while walking a fine line between right and wrong. Minutes felt like hours. Every instinct told Amaka to retreat, but the thought of Ada, alone and vulnerable, gave him courage. He understood now that protecting her required sacrifices he had never imagined, choices that would test his moral boundaries. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice low and calculating. "You're brave or foolish. Either way, the next move is yours." Amaka took a deep breath, steadying his racing heart. The decisions ahead would not only determine Ada's fate, but define who he was and what he was willing to become to save the woman he loved. Outside, Lagos remained indifferent, its lights twinkling like distant stars. But inside the warehouse, a battle of wits, courage, and morality had just begun.
Emeka's mind raced as he faced the shadowy figure in the dimly lit warehouse. The man's calm demeanor unnerved him, yet Emeka's determination refused to waver. Every second mattered. Every movement could mean the difference between Ada's safety and disaster. The man finally spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. "You're resourceful, I'll give you that. But do you really understand who you're dealing with?" Emeka's gaze hardened. "I don't care who you are. Leave Ada out of this or you'll regret it." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the man's lips. "You're brave, but bravery can be costly. You see, your wife, she's not just a random target. She holds something valuable to me." Emeka's stomach tightened. "What are you talking about? She's just sick, nothing more." The man's eyes glimmered in the shadowy light. Just sick? Perhaps. But the people around her, the people connected to her, have resources, influence. And you, Emeka, you've built yourself into someone powerful. You think I didn't notice? Every move you made to rise above your past, to protect what's yours, it all matters to me. Ada is the key to getting what I want. Emeka clenched his fists, anger mixing with fear. He had anticipated threats to his wealth, to his business, but this was personal, intimate, and terrifying. Every plan he had made seemed fragile against the mysterious force before him. "Then tell me what you want," Emeka demanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I won't play your games. If you want her safe, we can settle this reasonably." The man laughed, a sound that echoed through the warehouse. "Reasonable, perhaps. But it's not just about reason. It's about power, control, and proving a point. Your wife, your weakness, will show you how easily the mighty can fall." Emeka's mind raced for options. Retreat was impossible. Leaving now would only put Ada in immediate danger. Yet, advancing recklessly could cost him his life. He realized that to survive, he would need to think like this man, anticipate his next move, and use his understanding of human nature to outmaneuver him. He noticed something subtle, the way the man's eyes shifted toward a pile of crates in the corner, the tension in his posture, the faint tremor in his hands. There was hesitation, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable confidence. Emeka's voice dropped to a calm but firm tone. "You're scared. I see it. You want to control everything, but you fear what you cannot predict. Let me help you avoid mistakes. Don't make this personal." The man's expression flickered. For a moment, it seemed as if he weighed Emeka's words. Then he straightened, regaining composure. "Clever, but cleverness alone won't save her. You're about to see just how deep this goes." At that moment, the warehouse doors slammed open and the distant sound of engines roared outside. Emeka realized reinforcements had arrived, people loyal to him, allies he had secretly contacted in advance. The man's eyes widened ever so slightly, betraying the first hint of fear. Emeka knew this was his chance. He could either negotiate, seize the initiative, or risk everything on a single move. Every second counted, and Ada's life depended on his next choice. Outside, Lagos continued its evening rhythm, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the warehouse. But inside, a silent battle had begun, one of strategy, courage, and unrelenting determination. Emeka's heart pounded as he watched the man retreat slightly, almost as if he were calculating the next move. There was a sudden stillness in the air, a tension so thick it felt like he could suffocate. Emeka could see that this confrontation had crossed into dangerous, personal territory, and for the first time he realized that Ada's safety was not just a matter of negotiation, it was a matter of survival. The man finally spoke again, his voice carrying an unsettling calm. "You still don't understand, do you, Emeka? Ada isn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She's involved, whether she knows it or not." Emeka's eyes narrowed. "Involved? She's been sick in a hospital bed for years. What could she possibly be involved in?" A cold laugh escaped the man's lips. "She has something you thought you had buried long ago. A secret that ties her to people who could destroy everything you've built." Emeka's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented hints he had been given over the past few days. He remembered subtle threats, mysterious phone calls, and the surveillance he had spotted without fully understanding why. The realization hit him hard. Someone had been watching him and Ada closely for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You mean, this is about me?" Emeka asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. You're targeting Ada to get to me." The man's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. "Precisely. Ada is the bridge to your past. She carries the memory of your mistakes, your failures, your cowardice. She is the proof that even the strongest can be undone by the choices they make in love and loyalty." Emeka's chest tightened as the weight of those words sank in. He had abandoned Ada when she needed him most. That choice, made in fear and selfishness, had created a chain reaction he could never have anticipated. And now, years later, that past was not only catching up to him, it was threatening to destroy both of them. The man stepped closer, his presence menacing yet eerily composed. "You thought time could erase guilt. You thought success could shield you. But everything you avoided, everything you ignored, comes back. And Ada, unfortunately, is the price of your reckoning." Emeka felt a surge of both anger and remorse. He had spent years building a life, a fortune, a reputation, all while the woman he loved suffered in silence. Now, confronted by the man who understood the depth of his betrayal, he realized that redemption was not just about money or power. It was about courage, action, and facing the consequences he had long avoided. "What do you want from me?" Emeka demanded, his voice low but firm. "Name it. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." The man tilted his head, studying him intently. "I want proof. Proof that you have changed, that you are willing to face your past honestly. Only then will Ada remain unharmed. Fail, and the consequences will be irreversible." Emeka's mind raced. Proof. What kind of proof? What test awaited him? He knew that to save Ada, he would have to confront more than just this mysterious figure. He would have to confront his own failures, his guilt, and the truth he had buried so deep for so many years. Outside the warehouse, the sounds of the city continued, oblivious to the life-and-death drama unfolding within. But inside, Emeka knew that the next moves would define everything: his future, Ada's life, and the possibility of redemption he had long thought lost.
Emeka's hands trembled slightly as he stepped back from the man. Every word he had just heard cut into him like a knife, yet it also ignited something he hadn't felt in years: determination. For the first time since abandoning a day in that hospital room, he felt the raw urgency to act, not just for himself, but for the woman he had left to suffer alone. The man's gaze bore into him, unrelenting. "Time is short, Amaka. Your indecision has already cost her too much. You must choose, confront the truth, or lose her forever." Emeka's mind flashed back to that day in Enugu General Hospital. A day had been pale and feverish, barely able to hold on to consciousness, while he had packed his things in a rush to chase a business opportunity abroad. He had convinced himself it was temporary, that he would return. But fear and shame had chained him. He had never returned. And now, years later, the consequences of that single act of cowardice had returned to haunt him in ways he could not have imagined. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to steady his breathing. "Tell me what I have to do," he said finally. "I will face it. Whatever it takes, I will save her." The man's nodded, as if acknowledging that a small step had been taken. "There is a person who knows the full story of what happened years ago, someone who holds the key to a day's safety and your redemption. You must find them. But know this, the path is dangerous. You cannot rely on luck or connections. You must act with courage, honesty, and sacrifice." Emeka felt a surge of both fear and resolve. The city around him, Port Harcourt, with its bustling streets, its hidden alleys, its secrets, suddenly felt like a vast labyrinth, every turn fraught with danger. But he knew that hesitation was no longer an option. A day's life depended on him, and for the first time he understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. He clenched his fists. "Where do I start?" The man handed him a small envelope, unmarked except for a day's name scrawled across it. "Inside this envelope is the information you need.
Study it carefully. Once you move, there will be no turning back. Remember, the longer you delay, the closer danger comes to her. Your choice is simple: act or watch everything crumble." Amaka took the envelope, feeling the weight of his past and present pressing down on him. He could feel the pulse of the city outside, the distant honking of cars, the chatter of vendors, the rhythm of life moving on, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows. And in that moment, he understood that he was no longer the man who had fled. He was someone who had a chance to make things right, though the path ahead was treacherous. He thought of Ade, her suffering, her resilience, and the love he had buried beneath years of regret. He knew he could not waste a single moment. Whatever the cost, he would confront the truth, face the danger, and do everything in his power to protect her. Emeka left the warehouse with a sense of purpose, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. The streets of Port Harcourt stretched before him like a battlefield, and every shadow seemed to whisper warnings of what lay ahead. But he welcomed the challenge. For a day, for redemption, and for the chance to finally face the consequences of his past, he was ready. The man's words echoed in his mind: courage, honesty, sacrifice. Emeka had no idea how far he would need to go, or what he would have to risk, but he knew this was his moment to reclaim his life and to save the woman he had once abandoned.
Emeka's heart raced as he stepped into the crowded streets of Port Harcourt, the envelope pressing heavily against his chest. Each footstep felt like a drumbeat, announcing the beginning of a battle he could not afford to lose. He had no plan beyond the information inside the envelope, and every instinct in him screamed caution. Yet he could not turn back. Ada's life depended on him, and he had wasted far too many years running from his mistakes. He found a quiet corner in a bustling cafe and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, names, and addresses, but most importantly, a note written in a careful, deliberate hand. "Trust no one blindly. The truth is buried beneath layers of lies. You must act swiftly. If you delay, it will be too late." Emeka read the note several times, each word sinking into him like molten iron. He recognized some of the names immediately, figures connected to his own past and, shockingly, to Ada's current situation. One address was a private clinic on the outskirts of the city, where Ada had been admitted under a false name, hiding not just her illness, but the circumstances surrounding her suffering. A chill ran down his spine. He had assumed her life after he left had been simple, that she had moved on or found peace. But the truth was far more complicated. Someone had kept her in the shadows, manipulating her, keeping her weak and isolated. The anger that had lain dormant in Emeka for years surged within him. Not only had he abandoned her, but now he realized the world had conspired to make her suffer even more. He left the cafe, weaving through the traffic, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. Every passing vehicle, every passerby felt like a potential threat. Port Harcourt had changed since his youth. The city was alive, restless, and unforgiving, and the shadows held secrets that could endanger him at any moment. Arriving at the clinic, Emeka felt a moment of hesitation. He had no official credentials, no authority, just his determination and desperation. The guard at the entrance eyed him suspiciously as he approached. Emeka swallowed his fear and showed the envelope. "I need to see Ada. It's urgent. Her life depends on it." The guard's eyes flicked over the envelope, pausing on Ada's name. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped aside. "Follow me," he said curtly. Inside, the clinic was quiet, almost eerily so. Emeka's heart ached as he saw Ada, lying in a bed, weaker than he had ever imagined.
Her skin was pale, her breaths shallow, but her eyes, when they opened, still held the fierce spirit he remembered. Recognition flashed across her face, and for a moment the years of pain melted away. "Amaka, I thought you—" "I'm here now," he interrupted gently, taking her hand in his. "I'll never leave you again." As they spoke, a shadow moved in the doorway, a figure Amaka recognized from the envelope. The truth about Ada's illness, her captivity, and the people who had kept her in this state was about to unfold, and Amaka realized that saving her would demand more than courage. It would require exposing secrets that some powerful people wanted to remain hidden. For the first time in years, Amaka felt the weight of responsibility fully on his shoulders. But he also felt hope, a fragile, dangerous hope, that he could finally make things right. The journey ahead would be perilous, and the choices he made in the next hours could change both their lives forever. Amaka tightened his grip on Ada's hand and whispered, "We'll face it together. No matter what comes, I'm not leaving again." The clinic doors closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. But outside, danger was already circling, waiting to test every ounce of courage Amaka had left.